Hi, my name is Abby Church, and this is my presentation for Module 1 that includes a personal introduction and a brief presentation on the levels of government control. So, some personal demographics about myself. I live in a smaller town in the almost exact center of Kansas called McPherson, Kansas. Population 13,000. I've lived here for about 6 years now. My husband and I have lived in 5 different locations in the past 16 years. Two of those, which were our favorites, were Great Falls, Montana and Billings, Montana. And we lived in Kansas City briefly, and so now we are currently in McPherson. We have 2 daughters that are 10 and 7, and they keep us extremely busy, which I'm sure a lot of you that have kids know. They seem to want to be involved in everything, and so that is our life, is running those girls around to this and that. And then in between there, we try to attend as many Kansas State and Royals games as possible. We're very much sports enthusiasts in this house, and so we don't get to attend as many as we'd like to because of our crazy schedules, but when time allows, we definitely head that way to either Manhattan or Kansas City. I graduated a long time ago, back in 2005, with a bachelor's degree in early childhood education from K-State, and I am currently working on my master's in instructional technology. And so, one different thing about me is I always attended previously classes on campus and in person, and so it was a whole new world for me last spring when I started working on my master's online, and so I feel like I'm slowly learning how to adjust to that, and so I'm really enjoying my classes and the flexibility that having on an online class allows. So some work demographics. I am currently one of the assistant directors for our early childhood program for the school district. I monitor the health and safety and nutrition pieces, as well as doing some coaching and providing professional development and training. So one unique thing about our early childhood program is that we are a blended program, meaning that we have 4 different funding sources that constitute our program, that makes up our program. And so one of those are for students that are on IEPs, receiving services. They can qualify through state pre-K. They can be qualified as a peer or community slot where they pay tuition. And our primary funding source is through the federal program called Head Start. We serve 200 children at 6 different sites or elementary schools and in 2 counties, so it's definitely busy. I've held various different positions within the early childhood sector. I've taught public and private preschool. I've been a pre-K team lead where I helped coach and implement new curriculum. I've been a site manager, and so currently I'm an assistant director, and I'm liking it. I'm looking forward to finishing my master's though, and maybe trying something new. So we'll see where it goes. Moving on to the different government supports in education. So beginning at the top is at the federal support. And so at this support, we have the federal mission, which I learned that throughout history and throughout all the changes, the main mission of the federal government in regards to education has always been to promote student achievement and preparation for global competitiveness by fostering educational excellence and ensuring equal access. And that is for equal access to all students. One interesting fact I learned, and I'm sure a lot of you, maybe some of you knew this before, but the federal contribution for funding to elementary and secondary schools is only 8%. I just always imagined that number would be higher. I think because we see the billions and trillions of dollars that or millions of dollars at that level. And so I guess I just always assumed that it was a higher amount. And so that was very interesting. And so the purpose of that funding is to help fill the gaps at the state and local levels. And then when there are critical needs at the national levels. So schools must comply with the rules and regulations to receive this funding. And so then at the state support, they are responsible for ensuring that the local governments are following those rules and regulations. They provide oversight and like policies and accountability for the local schools. They help create, implement, and enforce standards for each state. And so those all can vary from state to state at this level. State governments often choose to delegate much of their authority to local school districts, but at any time they can reclaim that authority and decide that all schools must follow a certain policy or curriculum or implementation at the state level. States provide for slightly less than half of each school's operating costs. So between the federal government and the state government, that's not quite enough funding for school districts. So at the local level, that funding is generated from property taxes, from home and local businesses to help make up the difference. Local school districts are governed by the school board, which members are either appointed or elected. I read where nationally, almost 96% of those local board members were elected officials. So the school boards then hire a superintendent, and that person acts as the CEO for each school district and making sure that schools are following policy and procedures, have a curriculum in place, help with the day-to-day operations, the personnel. So they have a pretty important job and role in the local school districts as well. Local school boards are responsible for establishing the curriculum, the hiring of personnel, school closures, and our construction. If there are ensuring that they have the policies and procedures in place. And so the local school boards provide support to their schools to ensure that all levels of educational needs are being met at their local level. So who has the power in education? So at the local level, the school board does at first. They're all volunteers and like we mentioned previously, elected or appointed. And their main function is decide how the schools will operate. Then they elect or appoint a superintendent that's hired. It's a paid position. And again, that person acts as the CEO for the district. At the state level, you have the State Department of Education, which are hired and paid positions. The State Board of Education, which are elected and paid positions. And then the education commissioner is Dr. Randy Watson at this point, and his position is appointed and paid. And so they are the oversight for all of the local school boards. At the federal level, you have our President of the United States, which is elected and paid. You have your U.S. Department of Education, which is paid and hired positions. The Secretary of Education, which is Dr. Miguel Cardona, I hope I said that right, is appointed and paid as well. And so they provide the standards and policies, regulations that are then passed down to the state and then ensured that are implemented from there. So which level influences our course learning outcomes? So the first one is 6.1, evaluate, develop, and implement management, communication, technology, school level governances, and operation systems that support each student's learning needs and promote the mission and vision of the school, I feel is done at the local level. The local school boards know the needs and wants and the culture of their school and their students and their staff. And so These operational systems are done at the local level to ensure that all of their needs are being met. 6.2, evaluate, develop, and advocate for a data-informed and equitable resourcing plan that supports school improvement and student development. And again, I feel like this one is influenced by the local school board as well, the local government, in that the school board is determining and using data from their surveys, from testing results, whatever is done at each school to help determine their decisions and policies, any curriculum changes, technology changes. The local school board knows the needs of their students and their community best, and for staff as well. And so that is influenced at the local government also. And then 6.3, reflectively evaluate, communicate about, and implement laws, rights, and policies and regulations to promote student and adult success and well-being. I felt is influenced at the federal level. At that point, they are taking at that level what they believe are the right policies and procedures, and then for us as a nation, and then they're pushed down to the states to help implement those regulations. And so I feel like that one is definitely influenced at the federal level as they're looking at our nation as a whole and not based on each side and trying to do what's best for us, again, as a nation. Educational success and well-being. It takes all three levels of the government contributing their own responsibilities and expertise to ensure that all students have access and the right to free and public education. And this occurs when there is adequate funding, data-driven decision-making, and developmentally appropriate policies in place. And so it takes all three levels of the government to come together with each of their own policies, procedures, regulations, pieces, and funding together to make a whole piece to help make sure that we are meeting the needs and rights of all students and adults. And it also takes them all to ensure that every student at every level has a right to a free and equitable education. One of the quotes from one of the articles we read was in the one that said, education will continue to play a major role in promoting individual opportunity, social mobility, national prosperity, and progress in areas such as health and democratic citizenship. And I just think it's important that we all realize that the education at all levels plays such an important role to everyone. And so it's vital that we're all coming together to ensure that we're meeting all students' needs to help them be successful later on in life. And so for the final wrap up here, the correlation for our course learning objectives for me was that I felt that it correlated with the three outcomes based on that it separated each of the levels for us and compared them on their supports and fundings and help really interpret what that means and understand what that means for myself as not only as a employee but also as a citizen in my local town. And so I felt like those correlations were important to know at which level does it help and the support that is needed. This assignment was relevant to me in that we will be electing this year. Our school board will be electing 4 new members, and it was just interesting to me to learn more about their roles and responsibilities. And as I was reading through, thinking of some of the just had our last panel of questions for our school board members, and so it was interesting to put that into play. What I'm thinking about the board members, and so I also found it interesting at the federal level that their funding contribution was only 8%. Again, I know I said that at the beginning, but I found that to be interesting. I thought it was more. So reflection, it just made me more aware of how important it is to be educated on funding and where it comes from and how these policies and initiatives are implemented. And since we are funded differently through different programs, I think it's important to be transparent to our staff and to give more examples of how that correlates into our jobs, and so that they have better understanding.